I'm back in the same shirt and the raspy voice, but I'm going to walk you through the eye, and hopefully I can help make this a little bit easier. So this is going to be exercise 15, and I'm just going to walk you through the parts to the eye so that you can see them on these models again, which I wish you could all have access to them because it makes it so much easier. So we're going to talk about the accessory structures of the eye first, and then we'll go through the inner eye and the details of the inner eye. So first, we don't have eyebrows on this guy, but you guys all know eyebrows. And so then we have the palpebrae, which are the eyelids. It's a fancy name for the eyelids, the palpebrae. Okay. So because in anatomy we can't just say eyelids, we have to say, give it some fancy term. So palpebrae is the term we use. Eyelashes, you guys know eyelashes. Conjunctiva, the conjunctiva isn't, we don't show that on these models, but the conjunctiva is just this thin protective mucous membrane layer that covers the eye and will actually cover the inside of your palpebrae as well. So you have your palpebral conjunctiva, which covers the inner wall of the eyelids, and then you also have your bulbar conjunctiva, which is actually going to cover the anterior surface of the eye. So, but we don't really have anything that depicts the conjunctiva very well. So then we have the lacrimal apparatus, which is going to be what makes your tears. So we're going to have the lacrimal gland up here. That's going to be making your tears. And I don't believe you need to know these, but you have these ducts that go from the lacrimal gland down to the surface of the cornea there. And so that's going to dump your tears out across the surface of the cornea. And so lacrimal gland, you don't have to know those. They're called lacrimal ducts, but it is kind of important to know because that's later on, we're going to talk about the nasolacrimal duct, and it's important to differentiate between the lacrimal duct and the nasolacrimal duct, which is over here. So, again, with the lacrimal gland makes the tears. They run across the eye, the surface of the eye, and then collect here where they're going to drain through these, what we call lacrimal punctums. I don't think you have to know that, but it's the little holes in the eye, and it will drain into this. You will have to know the two lacrimal canals here. So the lacrimal punctum, those little holes, will drain the tears into the lacrimal canals, and then we're going to go down. I think you only have to know down into the lacrimal sac. So here's the lacrimal sac, and that will drain down into the nasolacrimal duct. So that nasolacrimal duct that then drains into the nasal cavity. So well, I always tell my kids, because they're like, Mom, wipe my nose, because I was crying. I'm like, well, when you cry, your nose is gonna have to run. It has to run because you're draining your tears into that nasolacrimal duct. So now you can tell your kids, why their nose runs when they cry. It has to happen. So there's the accessory structures for the eye. So let's go into the extrinsic eye muscles. So let me pull this off here. I'm going to move this down here so you can see the extrinsic eye muscles a little bit better here. So the extrinsic eye muscles are obviously just going to be the muscles that are going to insert onto the surface to provide eye movement. So these are going to be the muscles that move the eye. And they're going to include your superior rectus muscle, your inferior rectus muscle. It's going to include your lateral rectus muscles here. So you've got lateral rectus muscles. And then you're going to have these oblique muscles. So you have yours, and this oblique muscles are back here. I don't think that you, well, maybe they do want you to know, I think they do want you to know all of the different muscles of the eye. So I guess I should go through them. So you do have, again, the superior rectus. I wasn't sure if the class went into this. And then the inferior rectus down here. You have the two lateral rectus muscles here, here, and here. are the lateral rectus muscles. Then you have the superior oblique muscle. So that will be, let me turn this around so you can see this, superior oblique muscle here. And then you do have an inferior oblique muscle down here as well. So this, let me get my hand out of the way, inferior oblique muscle coming across here as well. Let me angle that so you can actually see that. Unfortunately, this doesn't come off. The whole eye doesn't come off the model, so you can't see that. But here, this would be that inferior oblique rectus muscle. So those are the major muscles that you need to know for the eye movement. Now let's get into the anatomy of the eye. So that I don't make this too long, I'll try to go through this as quick as I can. So this will be the cornea of the eye. So this outer layer is the cornea. And you can see that here. Cornea. And then the white portion of the eye is the sclera. So that makes up what we call the fibrous tunic. It's the outer layers of the eyeball. And they're like your protective layers. So again, cornea and sclera. The white of the eye is the sclera. Then you have your vascular tunic, which is going to be the portion that's going to have blood vessels running through it. And so the vascular tunic is going to consist of the iris. So here, if you open up, is the iris. Here's the iris. And then I'm actually going to use another model to kind of show you some of the, what I feel is kind of a better depiction. Well, I'm going to go back and forth between these. Actually, I'll probably go back and forth, so I'll keep this here. Because each model has its own advantages. But so here's our other eye model. Again, we already went through the cornea and the sclera. There's the lacrimal gland. Pull that off. And then now we can see the interior of the eye. Again, this one, the iris. You can see the iris there, which would be this portion right here. It was a brown eye, if you can see that without the glare there. So there was the iris. And then you're going to have the ciliary bodies and the choroid layer, which is the choroid. So here is going to be your ciliary bodies. And the ciliary bodies are important because they're going to attach to the suspensory ligaments that are going to attach to the lens of the eye. And here is the lens of the eye. So what happens is these ciliary bodies, if you can see these ciliary bodies here, are going to attach to what are called suspensory ligaments that will attach to the lens of the eye here. And they're going to allow you to do what's called accommodation. So as you look at something in the distance, then the lens will stretch out. And as you, and that happens because of the ciliary bodies, they're muscles, and the suspensory, pulling on those suspensory ligaments and stretching the lens. And then as you look at something close up, then those ciliary bodies will recoil and the lens will return to its original shape. And the lens will recoil and return to its original shape. So that's how you do your accommodation, through the lens of the eye. So kind of important. And then let's see. So the choroid is just going to be this kind of vascular tunic. It lines the interior of the sclera. So I'm going to try to show this to you the best that I can. So here, this innermost layer is going to be the retina. And again, it's not depicted well in these models because the retina is a very thin layer of photoreceptors. And the retina is important because that has all of your rods and cones. And that is what is detecting light and creating the image for you. So here is the retina. And the choroid layer is going to be the layer in between this outer, or this innermost layer, the retina, and the sclera. So there's the choroid layer. It's going to be a very vascular layer here. So, oh, your book, I'm so sorry, I just saw this. Your book on page 159 has a great image of this. So if you look at that, you're going to see the innermost layer is the retina. You'll see that, and then they'll peel that back, and then you have the very vascular choroid layer, and then that outer white layer is the sclera. So your book actually has a really, really great diagram of that. So, and let's see, we did the retina, and I talked about the retina has, again, all those photoreceptors. Then we'll talk about inside the retina, and that's why I wanted to choose this model. So if we're looking in the retina here, actually I'm going to have to take inside the retina here again. You're going to see this model actually has this yellow spot right here. And that yellow spot is supposed to be the fovea centralis. So the fovea centralis is an area inside the macula lutea. And the macula lutea is just a region of the retina that contains only cone cells. And in the very center of it is the fovea centralis. And the fovea centralis is your area of your highest visual acuity or visual sharpness because it just has a really high concentration of cones. So when you are reading, your words in a text, and you move your eyes, the reason that you're moving your eyes is as you are looking at each of those words, you are trying to focus that word and that light information coming in on the fovea centralis, which is your area of highest visual acuity. Okay. So I think that was all I needed to show you for that. The optic disc. So I'm going to show you the optic disc here because it's better depicted. Again, sorry, I'm going back and forth between the two models, but it's a little bit easier to see in some models than others. So this one depicts the optic disc really well. So the optic disc is your blind spot. So if I open up this model here, here's the optic nerve where it innervates the eye. And where it innervates the eye right here, where the optic nerve comes into the eye, there are no photoreceptors on the retina. So because of that, that's what's called your blind spot. Now, why you don't see a blind spot all the time in your vision is because your brain plays tricks on you. And you guys probably already know this. So what it does is it just takes the surrounding area and it just fills in the gaps. So it's cool. Your book goes through a little exercise that you can do to detect your blind spot, and it's amazing how much our brains. You can tell I've been talking too much today. Our brains play tricks on us. So very, very cool. But anyway. So again, that's the optic disc. The optic disc is that part of the retina that has no photoreceptors on it, no cones, no rods, because that's where the optic nerve is innervating the eye. So as, again, you take in information, and I say information in the form of light waves, right? And those light waves are entering the eye. I just like to kind of go back and give you the whole view here. So as those light waves are entering the eye, right, entering through the cornea, and then we haven't gotten through all of this yet, but through the pupil, which is going to be the opening here. But so where your iris is, right, your iris will dilate to create a larger area where the light enters, and that's the pupil. The pupil is just going to be this opening here where light can enter in through the lens and then eventually into the back of the eye there. So as light enters, it's going to go first through the cornea, then through the opening, the pupil, that's the opening, and then through the lens where the light will be refracted through the lens of the eye. So this is the lens of the eye. Okay, and remember that lens here is going to be attached to the ciliary bodies. So I'm just going to take that out to show you again. There you can see the lens attached to the ciliary bodies that are going to help control the shape of the lens and allow us to do accommodation. So that will impact the way that the light is going to enter the eye. So again, as it goes through the lens, then it will move from the lens back through what's called the vitreous humor. So this is the vitreous humor. And we'll talk about that vitreous humor being important to maintain shape of the eye. So through the vitreous humor and eventually then onto the retina. And so the retina would be the innermost layer here. So the retina then will, as we excite those photoreceptors, the cones and the rods in our retina, then that information will eventually be relayed from those receptors back to the optic nerve here at the optic disc, and then back from the optic nerve to the brain. So that's how visual information is carried, again, from the eye to the brain. So kind of cool. Let's see, I think we covered everything. Now we covered the optic disc. Now we need to cover the interior cavities. And the interior cavities are, again, a little challenging to see, but I'm going to try to do my best as I can. I'm also going to show you the plaque here in just a minute, which does a better job of showing your interior cavities. So when we talk about these cavities, these are going to be our fluid-filled cavities. We're going to have an anterior cavity and a posterior cavity, which are going to be separated by the lens of the eye. So here's the lens of the eye. So not the cornea, again. The cornea is the outer layer there. It's the lens of the eye. And if you look here, the anterior cavity is going to have kind of two parts. You have the anterior chamber of the anterior cavity, and that's going to be located between the cornea and the iris here. So between the cornea and the iris is all this here is going to be the anterior chamber, and it's going to be filled with aqueous humor. The posterior chamber of the anterior cavity is also filled with aqueous humor, and that posterior chamber is just going to be between the iris and the lens here. So all of this here and in here is going to be filled with aqueous humor. And then the posterior cavity, which is much, much larger, is going to be behind the lens. And that's what's filled with your vitreous humor. So this is your vitreous humor. And it's really cool if you're dissecting a sheep's eye, which, again, I know you guys don't get to do that, which is a bummer. But the vitreous humor is cool because it's gelatinous. It's got this gelatinous material inside, and students always love to play with it. And that helps to maintain your shape of your eye. Kind of helps to push and hold the retina in place as well. So that's why we have the vitreous humor and why it's different than the aqueous humor. Okay. So those are some of the major parts of the eye. Really quick, I want to go through and show you a plaque that we have, and I don't know how well this is going to, I'm going to take some, oh, lovely. I'm going to take some pictures of this for you as well. But you can see here, I'm going to go ahead and put my lens of the eye back in. Here would be the lens of the eye. And so this depicts your anterior chamber and your posterior chambers a little bit better, I think. So again, you have, and I'll just go through them really briefly so that you can go through those cavities here. You have your anterior cavity and your so here's your anterior cavity from lens forward and your posterior cavity. Within the anterior cavity, you have the anterior chamber between, again, the cornea and the iris, and then the posterior chamber, which is between the iris and the lens. And that's all filled with this aqueous humor. Then you're going to have the posterior cavity, which will be filled with the vitreous humor. And this is kind of cool because you can see, again, some really good details on this. So here you can see the lens here. And here's the ciliary bodies, which again are muscles, and they're attached to the suspensory ligaments. They show some of the suspensory ligaments here that would be attached to the lens. And again, those control the shape of the lens. And then here you can see they also do kind of a little bit of a better job on this plaque of depicting. Here is the retina here. Here where it's 35 and 34 would be the fovea centralis. Here is going to be the optic disc and the optic nerve coming in. And then you can move back through your layers. So the retina is the innermost layer, then we have the choroid vascular layer, which they tried to depict in red here, and then we have the outer layer, the sclera. So that's kind of depicted a little bit better here. And again, you can see all of these are the ciliary bodies that would attach to the lens here. All these here, your ciliary bodies. Let's see, I think that is most of what we needed to cover for the eye. And you can look at, it's a nice, your lab book actually has some great images here. So if you look on page 160, 160 actually shows you how the information is transmitted from these photoreceptors that are at the surface of the retina back to where they would eventually, again, join up to become part of the optic nerve. So it's pretty cool to be able to kind of see the layers of these different cell layers. You have a ganglion cell layer. We'll go over this more in lecture, but below, and then the bipolar cell layer, and so on, and how these layers are going to transmit the information that you're getting from the retina all the way back to the optic nerve. So pretty cool. And you can look at the layers. It goes the photoreceptor layer, and then you'll have your bipolar cell layer, and then your ganglion cell layer, and then the optic nerve. So pretty cool diagram. Again, figure 15.4 goes over that pretty well, so that it really gives you an idea of, I think there's some disconnect sometimes between students on how the information from the photoreceptors, from the cones and the rods in your retina actually get back to the optic nerve. So and that'll give you a little bit of that. Also, another great figure is figure 15.6, which shows the lens of the eye, and then it shows those suspensory ligaments and the ciliary bodies. So it gives you kind of a good depiction of that. That was kind of what I was trying to show you. Also, the figure 15.5, the coloring activity, does a pretty good job of that as well. So I think it's a fun lab. It's always interesting to go through the eye. You'll also see I posted a sheep dissection of the eye. So unfortunately, again, that you don't, it's a bummer that you don't get to do the sheep's dissection, because it is a pretty cool thing for most students. But you can see, we actually show you some images from the sheep's dissection. And again, and the lens too, because all the students always love to take the lens out and cut it open and things like that. So it's again, always a cool thing when you can do the actual dissections, but you guys can go through and watch that dissection and get an idea of what that would look like in the sheep's eye. Then on page 166, it'll talk a little bit about visual acuity. And visual acuity is always fun when you're talking about the lens of the eye. And so here's the lens of the eye. And what's cool is that the lens of the eye, when you're a kid, it does this great job of being stretched out when you're looking far away, and then when you're looking up close, it should bounce back. The lens should bounce back to its original shape. It kind of recoils back to its original shape, even though when you feel it, it's a really stiff structure, especially when you dissect the sheep's eye. So what's unfortunate for those of us that are getting a little older is that as we get older, the lens of the eye, it doesn't recoil quite as nicely as it used to. So it loses some of that elasticity. And what ends up happening is, as we look far away and then look up close, the lens of the eye, it has become stretched out over the years, and it won't recoil back to that nice shape that it used to. And so we have trouble seeing up close. So it becomes a challenge for those of us that, and it goes through this, it'll talk about nearsighted eyes versus farsighted. I am already myopic, which means that I'm nearsighted. I can see well up close, but not so well far away. So I wear contacts to accommodate that. However, as we get older, then I'm going to have more issues because my lens in my eye is going to get stretched, and I will have trouble with my near vision. So that means that those of us that are myopic, we end up with bifocals. So bifocals are in my future, which is unfortunate. But that pretty much covers most of the lab. You can do some of the things on, there's some cool tests in here. You can do the Snellen, there's the Snellen card test to test for your visual acuity, your accommodation, but unfortunately, you don't have access to the actual test. We would do that in lab, but you can at least look through it and kind of read through it. I won't test you on that portion of the lab because you don't have an actual visual acuity chart to do this at home. So you can kind of go through these parts of the lab. They're fun. There is a cool exercise. I believe it's in here. If it's not in here, I will double check. Oh, yes, it is. On page 170, please do the blind spot test. It's pretty cool, and it will help you remember that you have that optic disc where there are no photoreceptors, and your brain is just filling in the gaps. So pretty cool to actually see your blind spot where, again, that optic disc has no photoreceptors in it. So very, very cool. And I think that's the end of the lab. So I am going to go ahead and stop here and let you go. And if you have any more questions, just like usual, please contact me either through Canvas or email. All right?